Music? Have you ever considered the mysteries that lay hidden after the flood? So dark and so frightening that even the angels chose to remain silent about them. What if I told you the true terror didn't conclude with the giant's demise, but rather started with the women who bore them? These were not just any women. They were the ones who opted for desire instead of obedience, passion instead of purity. They fell for beings from another dimension, fallen angels who had rebelled against God Himself. And for that decision, they faced a consequence that has rarely been spoken of until now. This is not merely a tale of defiance, it's the concealed aftermath. It's what transpired after the heavens clashed, after the Nephilim were eradicated, after the earth was purified. Because once the floodwaters receded, there were still repercussions that needed to be dealt with. Repercussions so intense, so chilling, that only one could execute them. Archangel Michael, the commander of heaven's legions, the sword of divine retribution. But here's the startling revelation. Michael didn't only punish the angels. He directed his focus toward the wives, the human women who had allied themselves with darkness. What followed would leave an indelible mark on the spiritual realm. Could their souls still be reaching out to us today? Do they exist in legends as sirens enticing the living, with voices filled with sorrow and anger? Before we uncover the complete truth, comment 777 if you feel the enigma tugging at your spirit. And if you are among the many who support this channel with your encouragement and presence, we are profoundly grateful. Your light aids us in revealing what has long been concealed. Stay with us, for the deeper we delve, the more the veil will be lifted. What Archangel Michael did was not merely a punishment, it was a prophecy. And once you hear it, you may never perceive ancient tales the same way again. Are you ready to step into the unknown? Let's get started. Archangel Michael's astonishing action against the wives of fallen angels. Have you ever heard the expression that a single glance can alter the course of fate? What if I told you that one look, not from a man, but from heaven's mightiest beings, was sufficient to disrupt divine order itself? This isn't just another story of forbidden love. This is the most profound tragedy of love at first sight ever documented, one so grave it unsettled the equilibrium between heaven and earth. In the celestial realms, all was pure, orderly, and luminous. The angels, as God's messengers and defenders, were carrying out their sacred responsibilities, singing divine praises, preserving the beauty of creation, and standing as guardians of divine law. They were designed to serve and obey, lacking any desires of their own apart from the will of the Almighty. Their mission was explicit, their loyalty unquestioned. But then something changed. One day, as they looked down from the heights of heaven, their eyes landed on earth. What they witnessed wasn't chaos or sin, at least not yet. What they observed was beauty, but not the kind of beauty they were accustomed to. It wasn't the perfection of celestial beings or the splendor of stars. It was human beauty, imperfect, fragile, genuine, and it enchanted them. The women of earth, with their raw emotions, gentle strength, and mortal allure, ignited something within the angels that had never been stirred before. It was unlike anything they had ever experienced. How could beings crafted in light and sanctity begin to yearn for flesh and vulnerability? What was it about these women that transformed angels into eternal beings of wisdom, willing to forsake their original purpose? Genesis 6:2 captures the instant when this sacred line was crossed. The sons of God noticed the beauty of the daughters of men and chose wives from among them. This moment, this initial gaze, would signal the onset of a decline. It was the catalyst that sparked a series of rebellion, corruption, and ultimately divine retribution. Yet, a more profound question lingers. If even angels can succumb to desire, what implications does that have for the strength of human love and the risks of loving outside God's design? This is where the narrative takes a perilous and dramatic turn. The angels, previously untouched by worldly temptations, began to feel something unfamiliar, something potent. It commenced as a gentle intrigue, like a soft whisper in the breeze. But with each glance toward earth, that whisper intensified, transforming into a voice they could not ignore. What was this unusual attraction they experienced? Why did it stir such yearning in beings designed to transcend desire? It had evolved beyond mere admiration. It became a longing, an obsession, a flame igniting in hearts not meant to burn with earthly desire. These were no ordinary angels. These were the sons of God, celestial watchers, guardians of divine order. Yet, each time they gazed downward, the lines of heaven began to fade. The light that once emanated from them, pure and steadfast, started to waver. Their glory, intended to reflect God's holiness, began to fade as illicit thoughts infiltrated their minds. Meanwhile, on earth, the women continued their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the celestial turmoil unfolding above. They baked bread, sang melodies, tended their fields, and shared tales by firelight, never realizing that their beauty, laughter, and warmth had become the catalyst for the Watcher's fall. These women, merely existing as humans, unwittingly became the focal point of divine insurrection. Have you ever pondered what it would be like to be observed not by mere mortals, but by celestial beings, angels meant to protect, now yearning to possess? What occurs when holy watchers break their silence, not to safeguard, but to chase? As stated in Jude 1:6, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains, under darkness, for the judgment of the great day." The heavens were becoming increasingly agitated. The atmosphere was charged with tension. A decision was imminent, one that would create ripples throughout eternity. As the angels leaned closer to the realm of flesh, the skies above began to transform. However, the strange energy was not confined to heaven alone. Down on earth, something began to awaken within the women too. Something they could not fully articulate. It was not fear, but neither was it tranquility. It was as if they sensed unseen eyes upon them, watching with fervor rather than malice. They felt special, though they did not understand why. Suddenly, mundane days appeared extraordinary. The breeze that caressed their faces carried an unusual charge, and even the stillness of the night seemed to share secrets. Have you ever stood outside just before a storm breaks? When the wind settles and the air feels electric, thick with anticipation and mystery. That's how it felt for these women. Each heartbeat resonated louder. Each glance over the shoulder felt more pressing. The skies appeared ordinary, yet something about them hinted that change was on the horizon, not only in the skies, but woven into the very essence of existence. They were unaware that their existence had become the focal point of a celestial conflict. Their joy, their mirth, their elegance. It was summoning angels from the heights of paradise. The unseen divide between the eternal realm and the physical world was diminishing, and deep within, a part of them sensed that their lives were on the brink of a significant change. Was it destiny? Was it a lure? Or had they inadvertently stepped into a narrative crafted long before they arrived? Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven." But what occurs when celestial beings attempt to impose a season that was never meant to be? The world itself felt as if it were pausing in anticipation. Creatures grew uneasy. The breeze carried a vibration like creation preparing for an unavoidable impact. Yet the women persisted, unaware that fate, dark, divine, and irreversible, was already approaching. The angels were acutely aware that they were traversing a perilous route, one illuminated not by sacred fire, but by the flames of defiance. They understood that the boundary they were nearing was not merely prohibited, it was hallowed. They had been fashioned as divine emissaries, champions of light, committed to fulfilling the will of the Almighty. Every aspect of their essence was designed for loyalty, for worship, for purity. Yet, something had shifted. The longer they observed the earth, the more they faltered in their responsibilities, the more they yearned for what they were never intended to covet. Each time the notion of departing heaven entered their thoughts, guilt flooded them. They recalled the heavenly courts, the splendor of God's throne, and the privilege of bearing His light. But then another idea would emerge, stronger and more enticing. What if there was something beyond? What if humans were not merely inferior beings, but a gateway to an experience that angels could never savor unless they crossed that threshold? Thoughts once unimaginable now resonated within them. What does it feel like to love with the depth of human desire? Could we experience the warmth of a mortal embrace, the intertwining of joy and sorrow? Would we finally grasp what it means to be truly known, not as a servant, but as a beloved? Their hearts, once solely illuminated by God's presence, began to harbor the shadows of longing. Is it conceivable for a heavenly being to love something beyond God? Could a heart meant to reflect divine adoration be swayed toward earthly gratification? The Scriptures provide a haunting reminder in Isaiah 14, 2:9-24, where Lucifer himself proclaimed, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Desire outside of God's will is the root from which all rebellion emerges. Thus, the angels found themselves at a crossroads, torn between their intended purpose and their newfound secret aspirations. The attraction was no longer just an emotion. It had become a force, one that threatened to pull them down from the heavens permanently. With each passing day, the attraction intensified, and with each day, more angels found themselves captivated by their growing fascination with humanity. What began as a quiet intrigue transformed into a clandestine assembly. One by one, they started to observe the earth below, not out of obligation, but out of longing. What they witnessed mesmerized them. Laughter by the fires, tender embraces, tears falling beneath the moon's glow. These were feelings they had never experienced before, and with each new dawn, their determination started to weaken. They had witnessed the birth of the universe. They had seen God command galaxies into being and disperse the stars like grains of sand. They had rejoiced as the oceans were formed and the mountains rose high. Yet now, that splendor was slowly fading within them, overshadowed by a longing they could not suppress. Each angel found themselves at a pivotal moment. Should they stay true to their heavenly mission, or yield to the allure of a love they could never fully claim? What makes the forbidden so enticing? Could it be that the very limits God establishes are those that reveal the profoundest truths of our hearts? Heaven and earth were never intended to merge in this manner. The realms were meant to stay distinct, each governed by its own laws and purposes. However, the angels were now prepared to forsake everything they had known. Celestial defenders, eternal heralds, servants of the highest for a fleeting opportunity at earthly affection. Could they even grasp the implications? This was not a trivial choice. This was not mere curiosity. It was a defiance. The Book of Enoch recounts that 200 angels convened under the leadership of a figure named Samjaza, and they forged a bond. They took an oath, driven by fear and desire, to descend to earth together so that none would face judgment alone. Yet judgment was unavoidable. Their decision would not only alter their fates, it would transform the world. It would give rise to giants, to devastation, to the emergence of wickedness that would cause God to mourn for creation. As stated in Genesis 6:5, the Lord observed how immense the wickedness of humanity had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the human heart's thoughts was only evil continually. The heavens were on the verge of trembling. The earth was about to groan under the burden of corruption, and those angels, so enchanted by human allure, were about to discover a truth that resonates through eternity. Regardless of how convincing the rationale may appear, certain divine laws are never intended to be violated. The instant these angels, no longer messengers of God but now outcasts, set foot on the earth, a peculiar enchantment surged through the natural world. But this was not the kind of magic that brings healing or hope. It was something far more perilous. It was the kind of beauty that doesn't elevate you but drags you down like a riptide. Picture the most stunning individual you've ever encountered. Now envision someone 1,000 times more luminous, more perfect, more ethereal. That's how they appeared. But their allure extended beyond mere appearance. It was otherworldly. They didn't walk like humans. They glided as if gravity had no hold on them, moving through the air with an unbelievable elegance. Their voices were not human either. When they spoke, it was not mere conversation. It was a melody, pure and enticing, resonating not just in ears, but in souls. And the light, they didn't merely reflect it, they embodied it. Their presence made everything around them seem dull. Flowers appeared to lean toward them. Birds fell silent. The air itself shimmered. When they entered villages, it felt as though time had slowed. Farmers abandoned their tools. Mothers halted mid-sentence. Children forgot their play. All gazes turned toward these radiant beings, unable to resist their pull. Gazing at them felt like looking directly into a sun so dazzling it was painful. Yet no one could look away. The women who encountered them experienced a stirring deep inside, a yearning, a desire, a passion that defied definition. This was not mere attraction. It seemed like fate or an enchantment. What would you do if someone incomprehensible entered your life and made you feel as though you were the sole person in existence? Could you resist? Would you even wish to? These were not just captivating strangers. They were the epitome of perfection. Perfection cloaked in enigma, moving among humans like vivid dreams. Their skin radiated with a luminescence akin to silver under moonlight. Their eyes sparkled with the light of stars, yet appeared to possess wisdom older than the planet itself. And when they grinned, hearts melted. But a sense of unease also stirred within, for there was something behind that heavenly grin. Something felt amiss. They were undeniably beautiful, but their allure was tinged with darkness. Their charm seemed too polished, too impeccable. The scriptures caution us in 2 Corinthians 11:14. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. If the prince of darkness can present himself as beautiful, how much more misleading could these fallen beings be? Their enchanting smiles hid ancient truths. Their mesmerizing eyes bore the burden of celestial defiance and the chill of immortality. The women they approached were drawn to them like moths to a flame, trapped between wonder and vulnerability. How could they resist someone who radiated divine light, someone who understood their thoughts, fears, and desires without a word being said, someone who offered not just attention, but promises, impossible, intoxicating promises that no mortal man could ever fulfill? Yet deep inside, the world itself seemed to shudder. Nature was aware. Heaven was aware. And soon even the women who were captivated would discover this was not a fairy tale. This marked the onset of something sinister, something that heaven would not permit. But this is where the narrative begins to truly disturb the spirit. The alarming aspect wasn't solely what the angels had done. It was what started occurring to the women. The longer they lingered near these fallen beings, the more they began to transform. Initially, it was subtle. A peculiar radiance in their eyes, a change in their aura. They began to exude a presence that others could feel but could not articulate. It was as if the divinity the angels once possessed had begun to infiltrate them, changing them in body, mind, and spirit. They no longer perceived the world in the same light. Everyday life, which once provided comfort and significance, now felt empty and tedious. The touch of a human partner, the cadence of a mundane routine, none of it fulfilled them any longer. They had experienced something forbidden, and now they were irrevocably altered. Ordinary men appeared small and trivial. Their eyes, once open to simple pleasures, now focused on something far more brilliant and perilous. Was this love or manipulation? Were these women genuinely chosen or merely being exploited? The fallen angels were fully aware of their actions. They didn't choose at random. From the heights of heaven, they had already singled out the ones they coveted. the most radiant, the most enticing. Those whose spirits shone brightly, even amidst Earth's shadows. And once they descended, they wielded all their powers, divine wisdom, charm, and the facade of perfect love to become everything these women had ever yearned for. They whispered promises known only to angels. They became the very essence of fantasy. What seemed like a dream was, in reality, the beginning of a nightmare. It appeared to be romance. It felt like fate. But in truth, it was a celestial transgression. Each time one of these heavenly rebels wed a woman, the very fabric of existence quaked. Heaven sensed the violation. Earth bore the repercussions. These were not simple unions. These were profane pacts created without divine approval, based on defiance and longing, and the consequences spread far beyond anyone's awareness. Genesis 6:4 offers us a disturbing insight. The Nephilim existed on the earth during that time, and even afterward when the sons of God took the daughters of men and had offspring with them. They were the legends of ancient times, renowned figures. But what sort of legends were they? Were they heroes or beasts? Because the true terror was yet to unfold. The offspring of these forbidden unions were anything but ordinary. They were giants, titans, entities possessing power beyond human control and angelic redemption. These descendants, part angel and part human, would transform the world into a realm of chaos and fear. Thus, the lingering question is, what transpires when divine beings breach sacred boundaries? When love morphs into lust and blessings twist into curses? The answer is revealed in the subsequent chapter of the tale, where these children, the Nephilim, emerge from the wombs of mortal women, bringing forth a darkness that even heaven can no longer overlook. Now, let me disclose the horrifying truth about the offspring of these illicit unions, the Nephilim. They were not typical children. They were the cursed outcome of angelic defiance and human frailty. From the instant they drew their first breath, it was evident they were not meant for either realm. They were too enormous for cradles, too powerful for swaddling clothes, and they continued to grow without end. Their forms pulsed with strength, and their hunger expanded just as rapidly. Picture a child born of divine might and human flesh, a being whose growth did not diminish over time, but instead intensified. These weren't just large kids. They were giants towering over trees, their shadows engulfing entire streets. When a Nephilim walked, the ground quaked beneath their colossal feet. When they wept, the sound reverberated like thunder rolling through mountains. When they roared in fury, villages heard it from afar. They were frighteningly strong, capable of breaking through stone walls, uprooting forests, and crushing armies effortlessly. Yet their might was only part of the threat. These giants inherited their father's celestial powers, strength, perception, and abilities, but lacked any divine restraint. From their mothers, they inherited emotion, jealousy, pride, and anger, without the human conscience to temper it. Envision the emotional outburst of a toddler. Now, envision that toddler the size of a house, possessing the strength to demolish cities. This was not a fantasy. It was a living nightmare. The world suddenly housed beings far too powerful to manage and far too immature to comprehend mercy. Have you ever pondered what it would be like to live in perpetual fear? Not of storms or wild animals, but of your own neighbor's children? Entire cities existed in terror of the Nephilim. People murmured their names with quaking voices, hoping not to attract their gaze. Farmers fled their fields, fishermen ceased to sail, markets shut down. No one wished to be seen when the giants appeared, and the Nephilim appeared frequently. They took whatever they desired without remorse. They consumed whatever they encountered. Livestock, harvests, even humans. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was secure. Some reached heights like skyscrapers, while others spread wide like city gates. But the most alarming aspect was their intelligence. They possessed the ability to communicate, reason, and strategize And with that cleverness came brutality. The Book of Enoch describes this period in a haunting way, stating, "They consumed all the possessions of men. And when men could no longer provide for them, the giants turned against them and devoured humanity." It was more than mere devastation. It was judgment unfolding in slow, horrifying progression. The Nephilim posed a threat not just to villages. They endangered the very equilibrium of creation itself. Heaven looked down in sorrow. The earth trembled under their burden, and God readied his response, for something so unnatural could not persist indefinitely. High above the turmoil, seated on the throne of eternity, God gazed upon the earth he had once deemed very good. But now that good creation was disintegrating, the harmony he had spoken into existence was being drowned out by the sounds of terror and violence. What he had crafted with his hands was now being crushed beneath the feet of giants who were never intended to be. The Nephilim, the accursed descendants of rebellion, had transformed earth into a battlefield of shadows and grief. And the ones enduring the most pain were the very people God had breathed life into, his cherished humans. Each day, the cries of the innocent ascended like smoke to heaven. Mothers concealed their children. Villagers fled their homes. Prayers were whispered through tears, pleading for someone to come, asking if heaven still cared. And God heard each cry. He witnessed every injustice. The giants believed they were invincible, but the Creator was not oblivious. His wrath, although slow to ignite, began to blaze like a righteous fire. Judgment was awakening. That was when heaven's mightiest warriors prepared to descend. The archangels, beings of great strength and unwavering loyalty, were called to battle. Michael the commander, Gabriel the messenger, Uriel the flame of truth, Raphael the healer turned warrior. These were not merely celestial figures of tranquility. They were generals forged in the crucible of divine justice. Yet even they understood this would not resemble any battle fought before. They weren't confronting demons or fallen spirits alone. They were facing beings born of angelic lineage, hybrids of heaven and earth, filled with power, driven by chaos, and clothed in flesh. And they were everywhere. The Nephilim were not dispersed. They had multiplied. They had asserted their dominance. The earth had become their playground, and humanity their quarry. Could even heaven's strongest halt what had spiraled so far out of control? The archangels assembled their forces, brilliant legions that spanned the skies. But they did not act hastily. This was not a conflict they could charge into recklessly. Every movement was strategized, every strike calculated. They had to combat not only with strength, but also with the wisdom of heaven itself. The Nephilim were clever. They were swift and filled with rage. But here's the truth about serving the Most High. When you engage in battle in His name, you are never unprepared. For every rebellion, heaven has a counter. For every tainted creature, there exists a purifying fire. And for every darkness that rises, God already has a strategy to bring it down. Do you recall what Romans 12:19 states? "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." This was not merely a mission. This was a divine reckoning, and leading the charge was Michael. He did not just wield a sword. He bore the complete burden of divine justice in his grasp. When even the archangels, those mighty defenders of heaven, began to falter under the Nephilim's power, the atmosphere itself appeared to freeze. In that moment, God, in His infinite mercy and unwavering justice, decided to intervene. He refused to let corruption consume His creation. He would not permit the earth, intended as a sanctuary of life, to transform into a tomb of fear. Thus, the choice was made not merely to punish, but to purify. God unveiled a strategy unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. It would not be executed solely with weapons, but through the forces of nature itself. A flood, immense, relentless, and divine, would surge from the abyss and descend from the skies. It would wash away everything that had been tainted, not out of fury, but from sorrow, not merely to annihilate, but to renew. Genesis 6:13 resonates with this grave moment. The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And thus it commenced. The conflict erupted like the onset of a heavenly tempest. Archangels battled giants in fields drenched with rain. Swords crafted in heaven met fists as large as boulders. The sky transformed into a battlefield. Lightning split the clouds. Thunder rumbled like the voice of the Almighty. Across the land, mountains trembled. Forests ignited from celestial strikes. The Nephilim, accustomed to supremacy, now quaked as they confronted the vengeance they never thought would arrive. And then the rain began. Not a gentle sprinkle, nor even a fierce storm. This was something entirely different. The heavens burst open with a roar. Water cascaded down like liquid judgment. Rivers overflowed within moments. Valleys disappeared beneath swelling tides. The earth cracked and moaned. The flood was more than just water. It embodied God's sorrow, His ultimate decree upon a world that had lost its direction. For the first time since their unnatural creation, the Nephilim experienced something new, something strange and immobilizing: fear. It was etched into their colossal faces. It reverberated in their cries. These beings who once instilled terror now pleaded for mercy they had never extended to others. Yet mercy had already come and gone. What occurs when even giants kneel? When divine patience is exhausted? When God Himself proclaims that it's over? In that instant, everyone, angel, human, and Nephilim alike, understood that a sacred boundary had been crossed. A line never meant to be breached had been broken. And now, all of creation was bearing the consequences. This was not merely the conclusion of an era. It was the dawn of something entirely new. But first, everything impure had to be cleansed. Have you ever witnessed storm clouds so dense, so dark, that they seem to engulf the very sun? Now, envision that darkness amplified 1,000,000-fold, so thick that day turned into night, not due to time, but due to wrath. That's how it all began. The day God declared that enough was enough. The sky didn't just darken. It became pitch black. The type of black that feels alive, pressing down on everything below. The air thickened with a silence that roared. A weight so immense it felt as if even the earth was holding its breath. Initially, people were bewildered. Rain was not uncommon. Storms came and went, but this was unlike anything before. The clouds remained stationary. They loomed. The wind didn't whisper. It howled. And then the rain arrived. Not soft, not purifying. These were not the life-giving drops that revived the fields. These were the tears of heaven, dense, heavy, brimming with grief and rage. They didn't merely fall, they struck down like hammers from the sky, like the drums of battle heralding the onset of judgment. Hour after hour, day after day, the rain continued unrelenting. It didn't stop. It didn't lighten. It cascaded as if it had a mission. And it did. The mission was to cleanse, to obliterate, to restart a world that had gone astray. Even the formidable Nephilim, the dread of nations, the terrors of mankind began to feel fear. Their assurance dissolved into bewilderment. Their thunderous laughter faded into quiet. These titans who had shattered trees with their fists and fractured bones with their roars now quaked like lost infants. They sought to flee. They dashed towards mountains, scaling the highest summits they could reach, their enormous hands clawing into the rock like frantic beasts. But the water continued to rise, higher and higher, until the peaks vanished beneath the surf like everything else. For the first time, their might was meaningless. Strength could not halt the deluge. Elevation could not rescue them. Wit could not outsmart it. The very creation they had ridiculed, the rain, the rivers, the ocean, had now risen in submission to the command of its maker. Can you envision the noise? The wails of men, women, children, the primal roars of the Nephilim, the despairing cries of those who had derided Noah, who had scorned the warnings, now pleading for mercy, when mercy had already shut its door. And the fallen angels, those once magnificent beings who had instigated this devastation, witnessed it unfold, trapped between heaven and earth, powerless to halt what they had unleashed. Their offspring, their pride, their heritage, drowning, their rebellion, once bold and beautiful, now lay shattered beneath waves that no wing could elevate, no spell could soothe. This was not just rain. This was divine reckoning. As stated in Genesis 7:12, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters surged, but they did more than cover. They silenced, they purified, they mourned. And in that dreadful silence, one truth resonated louder than any thunder. When God acts in judgment, no power in heaven or on earth can withstand him. Amid the howling winds and rumbling skies, while the earth succumbed to the weight of divine judgment, there was one vessel untouched by ruin: Noah's Ark. It floated like a flickering flame in a world engulfed in darkness. A solitary survivor amidst a sea of grief. Inside, Noah and his family huddled with the animals, each heartbeat resonating with the sound of crashing waves. Imagine what it must have felt like to be within those wooden confines, aware that outside the entire world was being torn apart. The ark creaked and swayed as the water lifted it higher and higher. The storm didn't whisper. It bellowed, shaking the very foundations of existence. Yet amid the turmoil, the ark remained steadfast, because this was more than just a vessel. It was a covenant, a testament to God's faithfulness to the few who stayed righteous. But even within that sanctuary, they weren't oblivious. The cries of the perishing pierced through the rain. The frantic pleas of people banging on the exterior of the ark, pleading to be let inside. Parents calling for their children, friends shouting for forgiveness, but the door sealed by God himself would not budge. Genesis 7:16 reminds us, "Then the Lord shut him in." This was not a decision made by Noah. It was a divine command, and they had to have faith in it, even if it shattered their hearts. Outside, the waters showed no compassion. Fields disappeared. Forests faded away. Hills briefly became islands before being engulfed completely. The tallest peaks, once icons of grandeur, sank beneath the ocean as if they had never been there. And the mighty Nephilim, the giants who once trembled the earth with their steps, found themselves utterly powerless. Their might was meaningless now. Their towering stature could not protect them. The flood had no regard for strength or arrogance. They attempted to resist it. They climbed higher. They roared defiantly. They fought back. But the waves were unyielding, and soon even the mightiest of them vanished beneath the water like shadows disappearing into darkness. And the fallen angels, those who had rebelled against heaven for love and desire, could do nothing but observe. Bound in chains, held by the very God they betrayed, they watched their legacy drown, wives, monstrous offspring, and the cities they had built with forbidden wisdom. All of it collapsed into silence beneath the flood. It was more than mere loss. It was erasure. Their rebellion, once a source of pride, had turned into their downfall. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain continued without pause. It felt as if heaven was mourning, not just in anger, but in sorrow. The earth, once alive with vitality, had transformed into an endless sea. No mountains, no valleys, no towers of arrogance, only water extending to the distant horizon. And at the center of that vast ocean, one lone vessel drifted, Noah's Ark, the final heartbeat of the old world. When the waters finally began to recede, it was like witnessing the earth awaken from a dreadful nightmare. Yet it was not the same earth. The world had been completely cleansed. Nothing of the Nephilim's realm remained. No temples, no bones, no evidence of the hybrid race that once reigned like deities. It was as if time itself had been reset. A new beginning had arrived, but not for everyone. For while the ark had endured and the earth would thrive again, the tale was not concluded. There was still one group awaiting judgment. A punishment not of drowning, but of eternal torment. The wives of the fallen angels. The women who had embraced the forbidden and birthed giants. They had survived the flood, but not in the way they had wished. What awaited them next was darker than death, and Archangel Michael was already approaching. When the floodwaters finally receded and the sun once again illuminated the earth, many believed the horror had come to an end. Yet for some, the nightmare was only beginning. Concealed beneath the silence of the purified world were hearts still shackled by regret. Those of the women who had loved the fallen angels. They had endured the flood, but perhaps survival was not an act of mercy. Perhaps it was the start of their reckoning. Picture it. Loving someone with all your heart, someone radiant, someone who once shone brighter than the stars. These women had surrendered themselves to beings of divine beauty and unimaginable might. They thought it was love. They believed it was fate. But ultimately, it was deception cloaked in splendor. And now those angelic husbands, the ones they once cherished, were gone. Not dead, but worse, imprisoned in chains of darkness. Some were cast into deep abysses, as noted in 2 Peter 2, I duder 4. For if God did not spare the angels who rebelled, but cast them into hell and bound them in chains of darkness for judgment. Others were confined to spiritual realms, held captive until the final day of reckoning. They were unable to return, unable to speak, unable to even provide a final gesture of solace. Their arms, once embracing their wives, were now restrained by divine decree. Thus, the women were left to confront the ruins of what they had helped to build. Isolated, heartbroken, tormented. Some crumbled under the burden of it all. Envisioned standing on a desolate post-flood earth, gazing at a world cleansed, and knowing deep down I was partly responsible for this. The weight of guilt was overwhelming. Each tree uprooted, every soul lost, every child engulfed by the waters. It reverberated back to their decision. Their love, once intoxicating, now tasted like ashes. They fell to the ground, not in ritual, but in despair. Some cried out into the void. Others murmured prayers, their voices trembling with anguish. They pleaded with God for mercy, weeping until their throats grew hoarse and their eyes burned dry. But was it sufficient? Can forgiveness reach a heart that ignited the greatest judgment since Eden? Can love truly blind someone to the extent of inviting a curse upon all creation? Even heaven observed in silence because, while the world had been purified, the tale of these women was far from over. What fate awaited them? Those who bore giants, who danced with angels, who wept at the brink of eternity. The answer would not come through another flood, but through fire. Because Archangel Michael had not yet completed heaven's command. Yet not every woman bowed in sorrow. Not every heart shattered under the burden of what had transpired. Some, like Nama, refused to submit. Ah, Nama! The name itself echoed with silk and fire. She had once been celebrated for her beauty, her charm, her captivating voice. Even the angels had taken notice of her above all others. Yet her beauty had turned into her weapon. Her pride had become her shield. And even after the flood erased the world, she contributed to its unraveling. Nama stood firm, unrepentant. She wore her guilt like a gown, but not from shame. It was woven from defiance. She had indulged deeply in the cup of forbidden power and relished the taste. She had used her allure not only to enchant the angels, but to guide other women down the same path. Even as heaven unleashed fire in its silence, she still believed she was justified. Her pride became her prison, a cage constructed not of chains, but of mirrors that reflected only what she wished to see. But God, whose justice pierces through every facade, devised a punishment that was not only fair, but also poetic. They were transformed not into monsters, but into warnings, into sirens, into mermaids. Yes, those half-woman, half-creature beings of the deep condemned to dwell beneath the waves. Behind the illusion lies judgment. These women, once cherished by angels and elevated above mortals, were now fated to eternally embody the very peril they had once welcomed. They would remain beautiful, painfully so, with voices like music, eyes like stars. Yet their beauty, now a curse, would only bring ruin. Just like the angels they once adored, they would now entice others into the same downfall. Can you envision such a destiny? To be desired forever, but never truly loved. To be pursued but never treasured. To sing songs that you cannot help but sing, aware they lead others to destruction. These were not fairy tale enchantresses. These were tormented spirits caught between divine retribution and earthly remembrance. The most severe punishment was not the curse itself. It was the recollection, the awareness, the unending replay of decisions that resulted in the world's demise. Their thoughts became arenas of conflict. Some fell into insanity, hearing the wails of the drowned whenever they shut their eyes. Others turned numb, drifting shadows hollowed by remorse, too profound for expression. They sought to forget, but the ocean never released them. For the sea, vast and unforgiving, became both their confinement and their platform. It echoed their names, carried remnants of their past, and reminded them daily that they were no longer human, no longer lovers, no longer mothers. They became reminders, warnings, living outcomes of a love that transcended divine limits. The Book of Jude alludes to such everlasting fates for those who forsake their place. They are untamed waves of the ocean, foaming with their shame, wandering stars, for whom the deepest darkness has been reserved eternally. What could be a more fitting image? Thus Nama and the others still roam, concealed in tales, felt in storms, heard in the solitary cries of the sea. And what of the fallen angels, those bound in spiritual chains, confined in the deepest shadows? Their bodies were shackled, yet their consciousness remained fully aware. That was part of their punishment. They were not spared the pain of consequence. In fact, they were compelled to witness it. Every cry, every scream, every shattered moment of the women they once cherished. They experienced it. Not merely saw it, they felt it. The sorrow, the madness, the gradual disintegration of minds ensnared by guilt. It was not just agony. It was torment beyond description. And they could do nothing. Not murmur comfort. Not reach out. Not even close their eyes. They had chosen defiance. And this was their harvest. Meanwhile, the angels who had stayed loyal, those who resisted temptation, were entrusted with a sacred mission. No longer mere messengers, no longer just warriors, they became guardians of a wounded earth, protectors of a world that had experienced both heaven's splendor and heaven's fury. It was now their responsibility to ensure such rebellion would never take root again. From their new positions, they observed everything. They watched the oceans where the sirens continued to sing, their melodies haunting, beautiful, lethal. These sirens had once been their sisters-in-law, part of a forbidden lineage that heaven would never fully acknowledge. The faithful angels did not intervene. They could not. But they listened, and they remembered. They also witnessed humanity rise from the ashes cautiously, painfully, village by village, garden by garden. The people attempted to forget, but the memory of the flood lingered like smoke after a fire. Tales were passed from father to son, mother to daughter, about giants, angels, and a sea that engulfed the earth. No one ever shared the complete truth, but no one ever entirely let it go. It was a new chapter, a rebirth. The world had been cleansed, but clean does not mean unmarked. The faithful angels, once bold and radiant, now stood in solemn reverence. They had learned, they had seen, They had witnessed firsthand what occurs when divine beings cross into human desire. And so now they maintained their distance, not because they ceased to care, but because they comprehended the cost. They observed from the brink of glory, hands folded, hearts guarded. Certain lines are inscribed in eternity. Some limits are not just regulations. They serve as warnings embedded in the very fabric of the universe. And the angels recalled the lesson, a lesson drenched in rain, resonating in thunder, marked by sorrow. Regardless of how alluring the temptation, regardless of how intense the feeling, there exist places where even angels should never, music, tread. Thus, you understand, the tale did not conclude with the flood. The earth may have been cleansed, yet its echoes continue to ripple through time. The sirens continue to sing. The fallen angels still mourn in silence. And heaven remains vigilant, recalling the moment love transformed into rebellion, and rebellion into destruction. This narrative is not merely a fragment of forgotten lore or a caution hidden in ancient writings. It reflects a reminder that the decisions we make, even from love, carry repercussions that can extend far beyond ourselves. It poses the same inquiry those angels once overlooked. What are you prepared to sacrifice in the quest for something forbidden? And what occurs when it becomes too late to retreat? If this narrative resonated with you, stirred something profound within your spirit, or unveiled a truth previously unseen, I encourage you to comment 777 below to indicate that you're aware and engaged. Your voice is significant here. I extend my gratitude to each one of you who supports this channel through your likes, shares, and subscriptions, and a sincere thank you to those who contribute through super thanks. Your kindness enables us to continue sharing these truths with the world. However, even if you have never given, understand this. We remain thankful for your presence, your time, and your spirit. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this story today. Remind them that the flood was not the conclusion. It was merely the onset of something far greater. May you walk in wisdom, safeguarded by truth. May you identify the sirens in your own life and possess the strength to walk away. And may God bless you, shield you, and always remind you that some boundaries are sacred and some love is worth the wait. Stay safe, remain faithful, and stay chosen. Music.